Hey everyone, this is Monica with Studio 550. Today we're going to be talking about trimming. We'll talk about what it is, why you would do it, and then how you would do it. So one of the first things you want to make sure of before you actually start to trim is to make sure your piece is at the right consistency. So if you look at this one, it still bends as I try to apply pressure on either side. That is too wet. You'll want to make sure that your rim gets to the point where it doesn't bend anymore when you give it a little bit of a wiggle, and then you'll have to flip it upside down and let it sit so that the bottom can also catch up in dryness. So things will tend to dry top down because there's more air circulation up here, so it'll dry faster. So you have to make sure that the bottom can catch up and be the right consistency as well. Usually when we're trimming, we're going to only be dealing with this bottom inch or so. Everything from here up should have been dealt with in terms of thickness and finish when you are throwing. So trimming is really only the bottom section. So why are we trimming? We're taking off the extra clay, so we're removing weight. We're cleaning this up to make it look a little bit more finished. We're giving it a raised pedestal so that when it's finished, you have a clean bottom, a distinction between the base and the pot itself. And then you can also use it to add decoration. You can use it as a way to delineate where the glaze will stop, so you have a little bit more of a buffer between where your glaze is and where the kiln shelf will be. So hopefully minimizing some glaze accidents. And yeah, so you're trying to use your materials efficiently, making your pot feel like the best pot it can possibly be. So once your pieces are the right consistency, then you'll have to get familiar with what you have going on in there. Before we get this piece centered and attached to the wheel, we want to get a mental image of where the piece is thick and thin. So we'll feel with one hand on the inside and one hand on the outside of the pot, all the way along the rim, all the way along the walls, down through the base, so we know where the piece is thick and thin. We can even leave fingernail marks where the transitions are, so you kind of have an idea of where to drop the foot ring and where the transition goes to thin to thick, because the thick parts are where you can remove clay and shape. You also want to get familiar with how thick the bottom is, right in the middle. So another thing you can do to help hold your piece down is take a damp sponge and lightly dampen your wheel, because when you put your clay on top of it, it will absorb in and stick a little bit better. You can also use these concentric rings to get your piece mostly in the middle. If we have the wheel spin, if I put my finger a little bit away over here so you can see it better. I put my finger a little bit away from the piece. You see there's a point where it touches and a point where it goes away. So I want to start to get familiar with where it is off. Notice that my hand stays stationary. So it touches here, 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 and I'll start to anticipate when it's going to touch, and I'll get my foot ready on the pedal to stop the wheel wherever it touches. And if it's touching here, I know that the piece is a little bit offset. It's too far off this side from the middle. So if this is my contact point, I'm going to draw a line. Well, you don't have to draw a line. I'm doing this just to show you. You're going to cross the midline and push your piece a little bit across the middle. I find it's easiest to get a straight push if I line it up with my midline. And your adjustments when you're centering to trim, they're millimeters, not centimeters. So they're very small adjustments usually. Usually you can get your piece fairly close just with the rings on the wheel. If you try to center down here, and your piece is really off center, then up here it might not be centered enough for you to comfortably trim. So our focus is going to be up here. So it touches here, 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 here. So I'll make my adjustment across the midline. Push it across. So I'm doing this on a wheel that has a pretty responsive foot pedal. If you're doing this on a pedal that slows down slower, you can take your fingernail and you can make a mark where it touches, and that will give visual evidence of where it is off center. So when you stop the wheel, you can find your mark, and that tells you this is the spot that's too off from the middle. I need to make my push across the wheel from this point. You repeat and you repeat until you find that the whole piece is dragging evenly. Once your piece is centered, you have to make sure it won't catch and fly off the wheel. So we'll use clay to hold your piece down. You can use 3 little lugs like this that are bent so they fit the curve of your pot. Hold your piece down as you push those little slugs of clay down onto the wheel, not into your pot. You don't want to dent the edges. You'll put them 3 different spaces so they are evenly holding your piece down. Some people will use a full coil around the whole pot, and that is also totally fine. This just uses a little bit less clay. If for some reason they're not sticking, you can make the wheel a little bit damp, and that will help hold it down. Notice that my hand is holding my pot down the whole time so that as I push these little slugs of clay down, I'm not moving my pot. So these are your trimming tools. There is a large one that has a narrow point and a broad curve, and then a smaller one that has corners and curves. So when you are trimming, you're only going to be touching your tool against this little section of your wheel, this little pie, from the middle to 3 o'clock. Your tool stays in that little wedge, so it slides along that little railroad track, not going this way, not going up there, not over there, not over here. Keep it in that little track, middle to 3 o'clock. And so the angle of your tool also makes a difference. So if you hold it really flat, then the handle will rub the pot. If you hold it really vertical, it's not going to catch anything. You want your tool to be at a 45-degree angle. Go too high and it doesn't really do anything. Go too low, that little sweet spot right there is where you want it. Go too low and it's really just rubbing on the surface. So keep your tool at a 45-degree angle to your cutting surface. So we'll start in the middle, again going middle to 3 o'clock. The first thing we're going to try to do is flatten off the bottom of our piece. It gives us a level playing field for when we are trying to drop the foot ring in. So if you push with your tool at this angle, you'll get a spiral or some ridges. If you push with this outside edge of the tool with more pressure, you'll get more ridges. If you kind of push in with the tip of the tool on like the inside edge, you'll get more ridges. So really, to flatten everything off, we have to use the broad side of the tool, the longest, widest curve, and press that smoothly across the surface. So it helps to have a good hold of your tool. If you hold it from the very tippy end like this, or just one hand, you're not going to be able to be very stable. It really helps to hold your tool really close to the cutting edge, and also to use both hands to help stabilize. Shown again, we have the left hand making contact in the middle, and then the finger stabilizing against the tool as it slides out. So you have two hands stabilizing against the tool the whole time. Now, once your bottom is smooth, you can take your tool, again holding it with both hands, still the left hand's touching the middle. To hold that piece down, you're going to take that narrow tip of your tool and then press it down. Next, we're going to cut the stuff outside that circle we just made. We're going to go down, not inward, because that will tend to bump on any inconsistencies or bumps you already have. If you cut downward, then you've already flattened that off, so it's a little bit more smooth. So we're going to cut down, remove any extra clay, cut down, remove any extra clay, and notice where the hands are bracing. So the left hand is still meeting the middle of the pot, still holding it down, and there's still a finger, both hands are still making contact with the tool to stabilize. So if there's any bumps or sections that are not round of your piece, then hopefully your fingers against the tool can help hold the tool stable against your pot. When we're trimming, we're trying to make the outside shape match the inside shape that we left when we were throwing. So for a bowl, we would think that that would be a curve, but every piece is different, so make sure that you know your pot before you start trimming. If you ever are unsure how much you have left there, you can always pull it off, or remove those little balls of clay and then take your piece off. But just know that the pressure you use makes a difference. So if I run the tool lightly over this surface right here, it'll gently round it out and not remove too much clay. If I dig in a little bit more firmly, like right here, you'll see clay will start to fly off a little bit faster. So the amount of pressure you use makes a huge difference. Once the walls on the outside are the thickness that you want and the curve that you want, you're going to drop down the circle that will become the inside boundary line of your foot ring. And so we're going to brace on either side. We're going to drop down with that narrow point of our tool, and that gives us a circle. So wide feet will be more stable, narrow feet will be more elegant, but find the one that works best for your piece. The circle on the outside is going to stay raised, and so we're going to remove the stuff that is inside the circle. So we're going to touch down with that narrow part of our tool. It sometimes helps to think of making contact with the corner and then laying the rest of the tool down. You can also think of meeting it from the middle and then sliding out. And so right now we are removing clay. The clay should come off in these ribbons, which would suggest that your piece is damp enough, it's leather hard. They shouldn't come off and stick, because that would suggest your pot is a little too wet for trimming. But if they come off in these ribbons and they fly off, that is the sweet spot. If they're coming off as dust, your pot is probably a little bit too dry, and you should talk with your teacher about how to adjust your piece. Trimming a dry pot is hazardous to your health, the people around you, and also to your pot. Clay dust is bad to breathe in. It can cause lung diseases later in life from long exposure. And then your pot right now is very fragile. Well, if you trim when your pot is bone dry, it is very fragile. And the pressure against the wheel and the pressure of your tool against the pot can sometimes cause cracks that don't show up till after the firing. So please don't do that. Trim when leather hard. So important to know a couple other things. One is the wheel speed. Notice that it's at a fairly fast clip. So try to have it spin medium fast. And then the second thing is that trimming is a subtractive process. So the foot ring that you have, it's already in there. You're just removing the stuff from around that foot ring. So bring some attention to that is that you can consider what shape you make the foot ring. So if you have it pointed like this, then it will have a little less contact with the kiln shelf and maybe it will scratch your table a little bit less. So you can make it slightly pointed towards the middle, or you can make it really rounded. It's completely up to you. But if you don't have a lot of clay on the base of your pot, you can't leave a very substantial foot ring. And that is totally fine. You can have a flat bottom piece too. So this is essentially what you're shooting for when you are trimming. And that would be a clean finished bottom where the thickness is uniform from the rim all the way to the base. So it's important to make sure that you have a gap here, like say a 1/4 inch or so, otherwise you cannot put glaze here, and sometimes there's the danger of having a raised bump right there that is taller than your foot ring. If that's the case, your pot will wobble, and so you should probably remove some clay from there. So another thing you can do to finish off your pot is to take a metal rib or a rubber rib and smooth off the surface, because sometimes there's some grittiness or roughness that's left from the tool dragging through the clay. So everything else that I'm going to do in this video is all just playing. They're all optional. So if you're working on the basics still, go back to the beginning and watch it as many times as you need to. Something you can do is similar to how we marked off the foot ring circles, is you take a corner of your tool and you press it into the wall. This is a really great way to mark off sections of your pot for different decoration styles, or just to use as a decoration style itself to make a pattern in your space. You can also make these marks inside the foot ring. If your piece is thick enough, another thing you can do is you can actually carve the base. And so I'm going in the circular flower type pattern, but you don't have to do this. You can make it really organic and you can just carve a low relief picture in here. But again, it depends on if you have enough clay down here. So I have the wheel stopped and just turning the wheel manually and then taking out sections. You can do some more raised ridges, or carved ridges rather. So we'll make a little bit of a pattern here. And yet another thing you can play with is cutting notches out of the foot ring. So it helps to mark it off before you actually start cutting. So I'm going to make a little plus sign here and try to get them equally spaced. You can use a tool and just, if your clay is soft enough, you can take a tool and just tap the foot ring, and that will give you not a full notch, but just a little indentation. But if you want a hollow section, you can take a knife and then cut this section out. I really encourage you to go back in there and smooth off the cut edge, just so that it's not sharp and so it looks like it's well considered. And you can make these cutout sections angular, curved, really wide, really narrow. So it's, again, it is up to you. This is just playing. It's fun to think about how you can make the designs on the outside of your piece relate to what's inside your foot ring. So I'm just going to draw a line
extending from all of these little notches and then going through the notches, but only in those carved spaces. So just think about what you might want to do that would make it a little bit more interesting. And then check it out. How did you do? Is it nice and even? Go ahead and smooth off any final marks and then put your signature on it.